Hello, everyone. I'm Nicola Solomon. I'm the Chief Executive of the Society of Authors. And thanks for joining the very last of our afternoon tea series. And in fact, the very last of our Home Festival series. All our sessions are free, but if you could afford to donate a few pounds to the Authors Contingency Fund to help authors in financial difficulty due to health crisis, please do so. And we'll put the link in the chat. We're very lucky to have as our guest this week, Joanna Trollope. Today's format is, as always, a quick intro from me, and then Joanna and I will chat for about 30 minutes and then have about 15 minutes of questions. And if you want to submit any questions during the session, please do so. Type them in the chat box and we'll try to get to them if we can. So Joanna Trollope, CBE, has written over 20 novels, including The Rector's Wife and most lately Mum and Dad, all some of them behind me. She's also written historical novels under the pseudonym of Caroline Harvey. After university, she worked at the Foreign and Commonwealth Office and was then employed in a number of teaching jobs before she became a writer full-time in 1980. Joanna is a trustee of the National Literacy Trust, a trustee of the Royal Literary Fund, a patron of Chiltern House Library, a member of the Council of the Society of Authors, and has been incredibly supportive to me in my work since my time at the Society of Authors.
You deserve it, is all I can say.
See, I was just angling for... So, Joanna, we wanted to ask for you to start by giving a short tour of your workspace and your creative routine, but you said to me, and quite rightly, I'm not letting those nosy people tour my workspace. What is it? How do you feel about letting people in, as it were?
I think it might be generational, that I feel very much that there's a huge difference between privacy and secrecy. And I don't care for secrecy, but privacy is something that of my generation, you just automatically do it. It just is. Some things are not to be talked about and not to be shared. And it's quite difficult, I think, in this very, very sharing culture, which has grown up recently. I mean, since social media, really.
But in spite of that, you've been good enough to actually let us into your home, because even at the beginning of lockdown, you felt that would be too much. So has lockdown changed some of those feelings?
Well, I think you've got to go the extra mile with lockdown, really. You've got to be more inclusive. You've got to be just a little bit more relaxed about all kinds of things. And I think by the same token, you have to go back to some very fantastic old values.
Like what sort of values are you thinking of?
Well, I was thinking of the basic tenets of education. Those are to be admired and encouraged. I am not going to applaud the NHS. I would far rather that we paid nurses properly and we paid bin men and postmen and everybody properly. All the tenets of our society. I mean, I don't think that society needs another stockbroker, really. But it does need the people who keep us all going.
No, absolutely and completely. And what has kept you going during lockdown? How have things changed for you?
Well, I couldn't write. Extraordinary, because I write about real life. And being locked down was so unreal. It was such an aberration from life. And so I couldn't really write at all. And I did all kinds of things. I mean, cleaning the house it was very salutary, actually, to have to clean the house. At least I know what I own now. And, I really didn't know before. I just had a kind of idea.
That's so interesting. So have you been able, have things changed over the period? Are you able to write now?
Yes, I can certainly. The last few weeks I've been able to, as we've bad-temperedly come out of lockdown, and we're very, very anxious, I think. And I wear a mask and gloves. I take them absolutely everywhere because you never know. It's just manners. Some people are absolutely neurotic about it. And I think particularly people who've done lockdown in the country I think it's really very difficult for them. I mean, nobody's really socially distancing in London because you can't. I mean, the pavements aren't wide enough.
No, that's really right. And I did, having done half of it in the country, caring for my mother, and half of it in London, I can definitely see the differences. So in terms of your writing, what are you writing at the moment? What stage are you at? You've got a novel on the go, or?
I have got a novel on the go, which I have to say, I'm terribly sorry, but I never talk about work in progress, just in case the bluebird of inspiration leaves me never to return. So I never really do talk about it.
But talk in general terms about your process, about how long does a book take, and how do you, I hate to do that, ideas are asked, where do you get your ideas from?
Well, it's perfectly fair. I mean, where do you get your ideas from? And in my case, it's a question of tapping into the zeitgeist, as it were, what is preoccupying people tremendously nowadays at the moment. And also being English, we're not really talking about it. We're being really quite reticent. But it is a huge driving force. I mean, it's like the socio-economic problems of the pandemic, which nobody will name, but, everybody's talking about in a kind of nervous way. And so having identified what it is that people are concerned about and very preoccupied about, I then go in for the jugular. And that's how Mum and Dad, which I can just see over your shoulder.
Yes.
That's how that came about.
Which I was very excited about, because that was at the time the bookshops were closed and Amazon wasn't doing deliveries, but Waitrose had it at the counter. I did my first shop in lockdown and enjoyed it very much. And I was thinking about your previous book, When City of Friends, which in a way you've preempted what's about to happen, because that's about someone who gets made redundant when she asks for flexible working hours. And
she does.
Redundancy is going to be happening now.
I wanted to write that because it was about women and work, which again is something that is affecting all of us, and it's affecting us all quite differently now, because I think the lockdown has had a terrifically challenging effect, a very sort of rigorous, onerous effect on women, particularly. And these were women who, it was very interesting because I chose, with City of Friends, I chose to set it in the world which is regarded as being incontrovertibly male, the finance industry.
Yes.
And it was extraordinary. There were a lot of women. I went to Canary Wharf and I did all the research in the city and in the business schools and all of that. And in Canary Wharf, the women who were, they were really very senior in international merchant banks, or what would have been called a merchant bank. They were really very, very senior in huge institutions, international institutions. They said, please don't mention our names or anything of this kind, because immediately the tabloid press will denigrate us and talk about our relationships and our shoes and our eye makeup and our, general, there's a kind of prurience, isn't there, about women?
Yes, there is. And I wonder if that is one of the things that's made you private. And certainly I remember an incident at the London Book Fair where there was comments much more on your appearance than on your books,
Exactly.
And yes, and I've also had those kind of interviews, one which was all about my swirling earrings. Look, I'm wearing them against and my red coat. Really, I didn't.
Yes, I know. Yes. And also, if you were a man, would this happen? Does it happen to male writers? Nothing like as much.
No, it's true. And you particularly, I was thinking of City of Friends, but also in many other books, you rather, I say debunk, that's not fair. You make it clear how hard it is to have a career and a marriage and a family, and
It is.
how really that's not spoken about. And did you find that amongst the women in Canary Wharf talking about that?
Very much so, yeah. Almost all of them, and they were the breadwinners in their families, and almost all of them had very good relationships with their children and their work colleagues, and appalling relationships, personal relationships with other men.
Well, that's sad. It's sad, really.
I think
after so many years of feminism.
It is very sad. But I think we haven't got, we're in the middle of the most enormous transition between the sexes. We haven't got anywhere near the end of it or any kind of conclusion yet.
No, I think that's right. And is it your feeling that, as you said, it's become worse during lockdown? I mean, I don't suppose there's any statistics yet, but are we thinking that women have taken the burden of the teaching of the children who are at home and the cleaning?
So. Yes, I'm sure they have. I'm sure they have. And it's not really that women are incredibly put upon, because, if you're going to be a victim, you've got to allow yourself to be a victim. You've got to assume the mantle of victimhood. It's just that we haven't quite got to the point where we can say, women can choose whatever they like. I mean, some women are really happiest making jam tarts with a 3-year-old. And some women, Angela Merkel might be one, want to run a major country. Both should be allowable without women immediately jumping on them and criticizing them. There shouldn't really be a judgment.
No, and you should be able to do all of it, but perhaps all many of us do try too much to. Well,
I think most women do want a certain degree of domestic control.
Or very controlling as well. It was interesting hearing you talking about your research, and I know you're an absolute meticulous researcher, and wherever you go, you do talk very much to the people, and as you say, get a sense in. Once you've got that idea, one of the questions that's been asked here by Ali Sherrick was, once you've done your initial research, what's your route into really getting to know your characters?
Well, I don't know them very well at the beginning. I mean, I don't, and the reader doesn't either. I'm going to get to know them far better. In fact, they're exasperating me by the end. But I don't think it's possible to know them terribly well. I mean, I find the subject starts, the theme of the book starts, and then I go off and do the research. And then I will have a kind of idea which will emerge about, well, the narrative is a given, really, but I think that I start next on the dramatis personae, which I don't know terribly well, and then of course this fraught business of where it's going to be set. And it doesn't matter how obscure it is, someone lives there. And they write to me, or they email me now and say it's not at all like that.
And have you ever made a complete howler of a mistake in your work that you're found out in later?
I've made mistakes which didn't get published. Yes, I think one is bound to fall flat. In fact, it's, what's the Kipling poem about treating failure as an imposter as well as the truth?
Yeah,
you treat them absolutely the same. And I think that's very, very salutary to remember. You've got to stay humble, I think. You've got to stay just feeling in awe of the medium you're writing in, and terribly respectful of the readers who might be rather ignorant about certain things, but they're all bright. They're all perceptive.
Well, and you write about vast themes, and sometimes I think people don't notice that in your work because it's sold as very popular fiction, but I think
Exactly.
you
Yeah.
absolutely deal with the big issues, and you're saying it's almost issues led when you choose what to write.
Yes. I think if there's a kind of requirement for maturity from men, women, and children too. I love writing about children.
Yes, I think.
Well, I think the thing about childhood is it might be, idyllic in all kinds of ways, but I think it's a time of terrific anxiety.
Yes.
Because you don't know, you can't be certain that you're going to be able to do anything. I think that's a great worry.
Yes, I seem to remember looking back and thinking that 13 was absolutely the worst time in my life.
Yeah, well, fair enough.
And Stephen Thompson asks, is it more freeing writing male characters or are all characters complex because we're all human?
Exactly that. Men and women, because both are incredibly complicated. And we don't really tell the truth to ourselves, and we certainly don't tell the truth to each other either.
No, and I thought that in Mum and Dad, it was the right thing about characters, that you didn't know what they were going to do, but they didn't surprise you because that clearly it was a possibility in their characters, but
exactly.
They could have done other things as well.
And then if you think of the relationships between the siblings, the grown-up children, they were all very artificial in their ways, and they clung on to the myths of their childhood, the myths of their times, which is exactly what people do. And the grandparents, who are my sort of age, they've got different myths, of course, because of the way society was when they were growing up.
Yes, and the things that were acceptable and not even
precisely that. And we're terribly unforgiving about the time you're grown up is the time that affects you, the periods, the standards that affect you.
Yes, I think that's really true. And as we were talking about just before we came on air, is that you remember those things so very clearly, and you had so much time.
You do.
Deborah Jenkins says, are you ever surprised by the way your plot develops? You said you planned, but you might plan for things to go a certain way, but then they don't, particularly as you say, you don't necessarily know
very much so
well.
So I will plot the first 5 chapters of any novel quite distinctly, and I always plot the end. So I know where I'm going, but I don't know what's going to happen in the interim. And that's very, very instructive. And you have to if these characters are going to be as real as you can get them to be, you've got to allow them their heads. They've got to behave in a certain way that you might not at all approve of, and you certainly can't control.
And how long about does it take to write a novel? So how long are these people living with you?
Oh, I should think they're probably, when you take into research, it's a couple of years.
And are you quite...
And, I don't have this feeling that I know a lot of writers do, that they can't bear this baby to go out into the world. I'm just dying for it to happen.
I was going to ask just that. You're quite pleased to get rid of them.
To the readers at last, because I've been living with them entirely for, a couple of years. I'm sick of them.
I should know this. Have you ever written a sequel, or are all your novels stand alone? Do you ever want to go back to the same set of characters?
No, I never do. No, because life moves on. Life's an organic business, and the preoccupation, the problems are going to be different all the time.
Fascinating. And Peter Tyra says, do you still put the same effort into editing your novels now as you did when you first started writing? And I would expand that to ask, who do you show your novels to, and when, and how important is an editor to you?
To nobody. No, to absolutely nobody. And in response to Peter, I'd say that the difference is that I am now writing off the bottom of a tank rather than... There was a terrifically full tank when I was writing, say, The Rector's Wife. On the other hand, although I think I would, however sort of generous that was, I'm writing now in a much more spare way, because the readers have given me the confidence to feel that I don't need to sort of go on about anything very much. I don't need to have great descriptions of landscape or anything like that. They know, of course they know. And so it's all, they've given me a kind of extraordinary verbal confidence that I would never have had before.
That's so interesting. I didn't think at the time, but I did notice when I was reading Mum and Dad. It's quite a big novel, but you don't explain people's motives. You allow them to speak utterly for themselves, and it's very nice not to have kind of info, and you learn a lot about vineyards or whatever, but it's very integral. You don't sit there and explain the type of earth or the type of wine, and it feels very natural.
You don't need to. I mean, somebody among your readers will know exactly about that. They'll have a vineyard, or they'll know about wine in a particular way themselves.
And you've been asked by Betty Rose, and there's another similar question. Do you find the time that an author is expected to spend on media takes you away from your writing? And Fran Hill asked about the publicity trail and whether that's much worse than when you were first writing.
Do you know that is a huge advantage of being the age I am, that I have nothing to do with social media. I never tweet. I'm bored by the whole of it. It's not really that I despise it or I think it's wrong. It's just dull to me, and it's distracting.
But you do have to promote books, and how's it been in lockdown with promotion? Presumably things were cancelled. I'm not sure what stage you were in the cycle.
Well, I just published Mum and Dad. That was out on the same day as the Hilary Mantel, as The Mirror and the Light, which I have actually read.
Me too, of course.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's a riveting book anyway.
Fantastic.
But she wears the research terribly lightly. She just tells you the things you need to know. It's amazing.
Yeah.
So was the publicity? No, there's going to be various, literary festivals and things that I'm opening, which have to happen virtually because they've been cancelled. But I don't think really that I just physically, I just did the house, cleaned the house, washed the sheets. Gosh, it was boring doing all the laundry.
Yes.
All of that. I mean, the house and garden look absolutely immaculate as a result.
But you, at the beginning of this as well, you said that, the reason you are, in fact, our very last person on this series is because you said to me, well, I don't do any of that online stuff. And I said, I'm absolutely sure by the time we get to the last in the series, we'll be able to meet in person to do it. So let's do that. And you said, thank you. And then I was like, here we are. What do you want to do? And we're like, hey, not only are you really competent, you've actually got some of the best, sharpest picture and the least technical problems that we've had with anybody. So
that's the wonderful Sophia, isn't it?
Well, no, but it's also that we all learn to manage, really.
Yes, I suppose I've got less sort of neurotic about a lot of things, which is only a good thing.
And going back to your writing, and are you neurotic about writing? You don't like to give your space, but do you have a particular routine? Are you a morning person? Do you have to?
I was a late night person, and I'm now definitely, because of Anno Domini, I'm an early morning person. And I do remember doing years and years ago, I did, I think it was an article for Good Housekeeping, and it was about when writers write. And they nearly all write before lunch. And so that means some of the steamiest sex scenes you've ever read were written before lunch, and that gives them a completely different sort of view, doesn't it? Another sort of angle.
Yes, well, fascinating, I suppose. Yes, and it is that thought, you know, obviously we've got an audience of writers here, but people really forget when they're reading a sex scene that it was probably written by someone, you know, at a very dull desk or at a cafe in a rather grotty McDonald's or something.
Exactly.
And
I remember then I was interviewing people like Patrick Gale and Jilly Cooper and so on, and they were all saying, you know, they wrote towards some kind of reward. You know, they wrote towards a vodka and tonic or towards chocolate hobnob or something.
And do you write towards a reward?
No, not anymore. No.
It's your. No. Is it kind of your job? You sit down and those are your hours.
Well, I think it is my job, and it's got to be taken as seriously as that.
Of course. And Lucinda Byatt asks, did you have an agent from the start? Now, I know it was quite a long, you've been writing for quite a long time before you gave up the day job, as it were.
No, I didn't. I wrote the first ones. The first novels were just me and the publisher, which was Hutchinson, which sort of hardly exists now. And I remember getting a letter from an agent, I mean, this is about 35 years ago, called Pat Kavanagh, now R.I.P. Exactly. And she asked if she could be my agent. It's quite extraordinary.
And what drove you to write? Of course, was it because it's in the family, or I mean,
no? What do you think about really, I think it's more a feeling of wanting to engage with people, but in a sort of consolatory mode, really. Just saying to people, you know, if you feel like this, you know, you've been dumped and you want to, you want to kill whoever it is, or cut the crotch out of all his suits, or whatever it is. That's perfectly fine. You know, we've all been there. We've all done it. And I think that's very, very true. And I know I've been described by, you know, dismissive journalists as being the mistress of the cliche, but a cliche is only a cliche if it's happening in someone else's life. If it's happening in your own life, it's the first time in the history of the universe that anybody's had a baby or been dumped or lost their job or whatever it is. And it's that kind of immediacy, that sort of reality that I'm trying to write about.
And that speaks, I mean, that's absolutely true. And it speaks about to you, it's about empathy somehow.
Yes, and, very much so.
And I know you're enormous, you believe tremendously in the power of literacy and reading. And is it that empathy that you want to talk to people?
Well, you know, it's very sad that being educated is no longer admired. You know, it is denigrated now and termed as being kind of elite, that you are kind of superior, and there isn't a reality and there isn't an authenticity there, which is such a mistake.
Yes, I mean, absolutely. Absolutely. What I was going to ask, and do you feel, because I know it was interesting, not only did many writers say they couldn't write at the beginning of lockdown, I heard a lot of people saying they couldn't read either. Did you feel like that?
No, I read voraciously. I started with The Mirror and the Light. Then I went on to this, there's a wonderful biography of Chaucer.
Oh,
it's by a woman called Marion Turner. And it was really, you know, Chaucer wasn't a terribly sort of admirable character in all kinds of ways, but he was a thoroughgoing European. And you think how long ago he was.
Yes, of course.
And then I read the fiction. I read the Elizabeth Strout, Olive Again.
Oh, lovely. I love that book.
Oh, it is simply fantastic. It's so clever, because I remember reading Olive Kitteridge, and Olive is not an attractive person.
I was going to say the same.
It's so brilliant that she makes you go on wanting to read it.
And she gets more and more unpleasant as those books go on. But you still want to know about her, and I mean, that's what I think is empathy. You don't like her, but you're rooting for her in some way.
Exactly.
And what are you reading now? You were talking about Shakespeare before.
Yes, I am. I'm reading this book by Emma Smith, which I gather in hardback was the great Christmas present. You know, it was what everybody except me gave to each other, and it's now a Pelican, and it's by Emma Smith, and it's called This Is Shakespeare. I'm reading a proof copy of the new Isabel Colgate, Orlando King.
Ooh.
And I'm also reading, I've always got half a dozen books on the go. I'm also reading some fantastic short stories by Elizabeth Gaskell called Lois the Witch.
Oh, wonderful.
Which are fantastic. Well, I'd been reading North and South because of, you know, the upset and the sort of horrors of mill workers and so on.
Yes.
And yes, all rather relevant at the moment. And so I'm, you know, and North and South led on to this.
And they're good? I don't think I've ever read her short story.
It's grippingly good. she knew how to write. Yes.
And
she knew how to tell a story, which I think is probably even more important.
And Jenny Quintana asks, which of your novels do you have the most affection for, and why?
Oh, I think it's nearly always the last one that I have a great affection for. I mean, if I look back at the various novels I've written, which are now sort of, I think there's 22 of them. I think Mum and Dad was the 22nd. There are some that I am terribly grateful for because they rescued me, like The Rector's Wife, which rescued me financially. Because, you know, we had bailiffs at the door and all kinds of horrors. But I don't think, and there are some, you know, that I know are much better written than others. You know, if I was judging them purely dispassionately in the way I would judge an essay, I know that, for example, Other People's Children is rather a good sort of novel, just in its structure. But I don't think that they're real favourites. No, I don't think they are. I think I'm you know, it goes back to this thing of saying, you know, I've lived with these people intensely for a couple of years, and therefore I'm thankful to hand them over to the readers. And I think it's probably very much the same.
And you've explored that idea?
Yes, I have. And anyway, the world has then moved on to something else, to some other preoccupation.
Yes, absolutely. And one of the questions I was going to ask you about that is, we are in a world that is changing, and you talked a bit about Europe, and with it looking as if we're about to be having a no-deal Brexit. Is that going to make a difference? You know, Chaucer being a huge European, how does it all feel to you at the moment?
Well, I was an ardent Remainer. In fact, I think I'm crosser now about the whole Brexit nonsense than I was the morning after the referendum. I think I'm more indignant, just generally. But so I think it's a grave mistake. And the sort of muddle of the current government is evidence that it's a grave mistake. But I think we are going to change very much. Yes. And I would like all kinds of things, like paying nurses properly, education coming back to being admired and sought after, aspired to. And all the, you know, just those, and the basic levels of education and civilization. I mean, I know that the veneer of civilization is paper thin on almost everybody. You know, we revert, like Greek tragedy, we revert to behaving hideously at the drop of a hat. But we do strive to behave well. And that striving is extremely important.
And also in terms of being more insular and therefore, I mean, one of the things your books do is reach out to quite a lot of audiences. And also in terms of your books are also translated quite widely. How does that feel? Because some of them feel very grounded here. And are you involved in the translation process?
Well, I think, you know, a broken heart's a broken heart in Tokyo or Timbuktu, isn't it? You know, it's misery.
And how are you involved? Do you speak to translators at all? Do you keep
well you know, the only language I'm really good at is French, but my French is extraordinarily old-fashioned now. I was realizing the other day, because I've got 3 grandchildren in Brussels who are all educated in French, and I realized when I was put in charge of the 11-year-old and her little friends, you know, her copine, that I didn't understand a word they were saying, because, you know, the slang has changed. The speed at which they speak is so different. So although I have been translated into, I think it's nearly 30 languages, I don't really know whether they're any good or not.
And have you worked on other adaptations? Have any of your book, Beatrice Amandia asked, would you like your novels to be made into films, and have any actually been made into films?
No, they haven't. No, I think my novels are perfect television material. But I was watching, did you watch Mrs. America last night?
I did.
Well, it's a real treat.
Oh, well, another thing to put on my list.
Absolutely. It's fantastic. And Kate Blanchett is amazing in it. And it revisits all the issues that are so familiar to us, you know, particularly women's liberation and gender equality and gender pay equality and all these things. So I think that really the kind of intimacy of television is, and it doesn't really matter where you watch it, I think it's really very, very powerful.
Yes, well, here we are. Any good television agents looking out to get some serializations done of your wonderful books, that would be great. In looking a bit more widely, presumably, how did you support? I mean, local bookshops are now reopening. Have you got a loved local bookshop near you, and how have you been supporting them during lockdown, which has been quite difficult? Well,
I have got several near me in West London, but I think they've had a simply dreadful time, and those of them who don't operate some kind of online service, you know, it's appalling, but it's amazing, human ingenuity being such as it is, how enterprising they've been, and they really have been extraordinarily.
They've been wonderful, and I know that we definitely do need to keep supporting them. One of the concerns of the Society of Authors is, although Amazon did quite well with getting books out there, and there are supermarkets, that favours the books and the authors who are already known. But to keep the middle in people's eyes is very difficult without bookshops.
I think so. I think you need it. And the idea that you can't now just spend half an hour in a bookshop just browsing is unbearable, really.
I know, because when people are saying to you, please don't touch them and I'll have to quarantine them, it's not the same experience.
It's so not the same. No, you've got to touch everything.
Yes.
Yes, exactly. But I think we'll relax. I think it really isn't possible, this social distancing. It just isn't possible. You know, human beings need to be in groups together next to each other.
And have you been in lockdown alone? Have you been you seen your family? Because there's some of them in Brussels, you're saying?
Yes, no, the Brussels daughter is coming to stay at the weekend. Yes, because Eurostar are permitting her to come, masked, but she's able to come. And, you know, I met the other daughter in Oxford, who's a barrister in Oxford. We met in the Chilterns for amazing walks. I mean, the Chilterns are thoroughly over-manicured, one has to say, but, you know, very impressive all the same, and didn't meet a soul.
No, I actually went to my mother yesterday, and we went out to a garden of 220 acres of parkland, and we were literally the only car in the car park, so it was rather good for us.
Yes, it is. It is. Well, nobody dares stir, do they?
And people aren't sure. One of the questions about the handling is people aren't sure what they can do.
Exactly.
But our concern, I think, for authors and for others is, when are we going to get back with events? When are we going to be back in our building? What is people's appetite going to be doing?
Gorgeous new building.
Our gorgeous new building. Well, we are thinking that for all of you who've loved this series, we are going to be doing something similar in the autumn, but we will stay online, I think, for the autumn at least, because we aren't sure if we can pull people back together into rooms, and some of that's great. Right. But as you say, even for people who do work at home and alone, for authors, it's been a very tough time, and I think many people.
I think it has been.
Yes. You know, not finding the inspiration, not doing the research, not doing their school visits.
Exactly.
It's been very tough financially, but it's also been very tough on the imagination.
It has been, but quite. I sort of feel, because of my, I suppose, the Protestant work ethic and just a general sort of Puritanism in my upbringing, I sort of feel it was quite good for us.
What are you thinking of?
I just think it might have been quite salutary. I mean, has it actually dealt a death blow to to something like celebrity? You know, all those Z-list celebrities.
I don't know. They're not partying, but they are writing hideous things about each other on Twitter. So,
well, I mean, you know, perhaps there'll be yet another divide.
And to go on to another question, because I realise we're almost out of time, Fran Hill asks, do you read reviews of your books? Have you changed your attitude to reviews over your career?
Well, when I was first, it's a very interesting question, Fran. When I was first writing, when The Rector's Wife was published, I suppose it must be now nearly 30 years ago, it was quite waspish and quite bitter and quite savage. But of course, the generosity of sharing has really put paid to all that kind of nonsense. And there were some horrible reviews. Yes, very, very unpleasant reviews, sort of early on. But there's something, I don't know whether it's being just the age I am or what. You know, there's a kind of grudging respect is due now.
For your books or for the reviewers?
For the reviewers. I do remember giving, what was it? Was it a Catherine Pakenham Award? Journalist.
Longford ones, or?
No, I think it was one of her, the daughters who had died rather early.
Yes.
And I mean, I'm talking of about 35 years ago again. And I remember saying to all these young journalists, you know, there is really no need to be, you know, be critical if you want to, but just don't be kind of bitter and sour. Because I think that's over, really. You know, you just look old-fashioned now.
And actually, that's one of the things that comes across about your books. You may not particularly, we like some of the characters more than others, but we understand all of them.
No, you're absolutely not supposed to like all of them. You're supposed to feel, the only thing I want you to feel is that they are real, that they are as maddening and exasperating as people in real life are.
And as complex.
Yes, exactly.
I'm really sorry to say to everybody, because this has gone so horrendously quickly, that we are out of time, and we're out of time on the whole series. So huge thanks to you, Joanna. It's always such a pleasure to talk to you. I can't wait to get our breakfasts back in, as well as our afternoon.
I know.
And you're always so thoughtful and have such a wide view of everything. I think it's just wonderful to speak to you. So thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who listened in too. And again, to remind everyone, these sessions are free, but if you could afford to donate a few pounds to the Authors Contingency Fund to support authors in financial difficulty, please do so. The link is at the top. There are many authors still in need due to COVID, and we are definitely going to be needing to fundraise to continue to help them. Thanks to everyone at the Society of Authors who set this up for us.
Yes, huge thanks to Sophia particularly.
She's been wonderful. Do continue the conversation on Twitter under the festival hashtag at SoA at Home. We have these will all be up later. If you miss them, you can see them on the Vimeo. And just thank you for everything, and goodbye until the autumn to everybody. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.